Hello, I'm Max Ravitz with Moog Music, and I'm here with our friends from Guitar Center checking out the Moog Muse. I am the product strategist at Moog Music, and I was on the design team for Muse and helped develop some of the functionality of the instrument. And it is a significant instrument for us because in the history of Moog, we've only made 4 polysynths, including the Muse. We made the Polymoog in the 70s, the Memorymoog in the 80s, more recently the Moog One, and now we have the Moog Muse. It is an instrument that is equally suited for studio or stage, and it's built into a rugged sheet metal enclosure with a 61-key Fatar keybed with velocity and aftertouch. We're going to take a moment and look at some of the features in the voice path, because as we know, the most important thing about a synthesizer is how it sounds. So I'm going to go ahead and initialize a patch so that we can start from a neutral place. Our sound sources start with 2 voltage-controlled oscillators that are based on the topology from the Minimoog Voyager, but we have developed a new wave shaping paradigm that gives you 3 different points of expression for modifying and morphing waveforms. We start with a wave shaper that goes from a triangle wave smoothly over to a saw wave, and then we have an additional crossfader that mixes that saw to triangle mixture with a pulse wave. And then you have adjustable pulse width control. You can push the width so that it's thin enough to hit silence. And so with those 3 wave shaping options, you can modulate all 3 of them to get some really interesting morphing, and that exists per oscillator. Additionally, you can control the frequency, octave, and some of the FM controls for each oscillator separately. In addition to the 2 voltage-controlled oscillators, we also have a modulation oscillator that can serve double duties as either an LFO or a third oscillator if you want to imitate some Minimoog Model D patches. But it is an analog modulation source, and it exists per voice. So if we use it to modulate something like, say, the filter cutoff, we can get this really beautiful phasing relationship between all the voices as you hear the modulation moving the parameters around. So let's hear how that sounds. So moving on, all of the oscillators are fed into a voltage controllable mixer, and the level of every single channel in the mixer can be modulated in the mod map. It's based on the topology of the CP3 mixer that was used in some of the 5U vintage modulars. But Moog is known for soft clipping and saturating mixers, where when you turn the level all the way up, you'll get a little bit of saturation on the channel. And since this is a polysynth, we wanted to prioritize making a clean mix and having that be something that you can do easily so you can avoid intervallic distortion between voices. But we also added an overload control in the mixer, where if you turn it all the way up, then you get classic Minimoog or Moog modular style mixing where you can soft clip all of the waveforms. And that also is really important because it can control how much you're driving into the filter, which has a big impact on the tonality and character of the filter. Speaking of the filters, we have 2 filters that are mostly identical except for the fact that filter 1 can be configured as a high pass filter, so it's state variable. And then we have some really good routing options, and the filters are based on the 904A filters that you found in the vintage Moog modulars. But we also took a little bit of inspiration from some of the control paradigm that we had on the matriarch, while still allowing additional flexibility that you can decouple the filters or have them linked depending on what you want to do. So we can take a listen to how those sound. Filter 1 right now I have configured as a high pass. And I can increase resonance to make that sweep a little more dramatic. And then filter 2 we have as a dedicated low pass filter. And then what we can do is when they're routed in serial, meaning that filter 1 flows through filter 2 and gets filtered by filter 2, if I link the 2 filters together, then the cutoff control for filter 2 becomes a master cutoff for both filters, and I can set a spacing amount using the filter 1 cutoff, and that allows me to create band pass filters, so we can hear how that sounds. But because this is not just a single bandpass filter and we're using two filters to create a bandpass, we have the added advantage of being able to control the width of that band. So if I have it all the way up and I adjust the spacing control on filter 1, what I'm able to do is control how much of the low end gets removed by the bandpass filter. Now, another trick that we can do with both of these filters is if we use the order switch to set them in parallel, then filter 1 no longer runs through filter 2, but the two of them are output and summed into the VCA. And that opens the option of us creating notch filters and phaser-like effects. So we can hear how that sounds. And similar to the bandpass filter, we have the option of controlling the width of that notch by adjusting the spacing. The last mode that we have on the filters is the ability to run them in stereo. For this example, I'm just going to turn the high pass off so that they're both a low pass filter. What happens is filter 1 is hard pan to the left, filter 2 is hard pan to the right. So we wind up with the ability to sweep a filter in stereo and even offset the two cutoffs to get more dramatic stereo sweeps. This gives us the option of accentuating one side of the filter if we want to. From the filters to complete the voice path, we then run into a VCA, and this is based on the 902 VCAs that you would find in the vintage Moog modulars. But for this implementation, we did it in stereo to accommodate all of the interesting panning options that we wanted to use with Muse. And so that's the entire analog voice path. The next thing that we will explore is our diffusion delay. This is a digital effects processor that we spent a really long time, and one of the things that we focused on was tailoring it to complement the analog voice that we have on Muse. So the two make a really powerful pair, and the delay is a great way to add a lot of space and dimension to the sounds that you hear. Additionally, we developed a unique diffusion network that features 24 different delay lines that are all being modulated by 6 different LFOs. And you're able to get these really beautiful diffused smears from your sound to create reverb adjacent sounds. And we can pull up a patch that really takes advantage of the diffusion and hear how it sounds. So as you can hear, the diffusion network is a really great way to take your sound and kind of suspend it in time and smear it and stretch it and add these really interesting dimensional effects to your sounds. But if you're someone that wants to maintain the analog purity and you don't want to run any sort of digital effect with the synth, it's as simple as just unassigning the two timbres from hitting the delay, and then you wind up with a purely analog signal path. Next, we can talk about some of the powerful modulation options that we have on Muse. On the panel, we have a lot of modulation sources. We have 2 ADSR envelopes that allow you to adjust the curve of each timing stage per envelope, as well as the ability to set them up to reset in different ways when voices are stolen, loop, be controlled by velocity. So they're really powerful and flexible envelopes, and you can modulate the timing of every single stage in the envelope in the mod map. We have 2 general purpose LFOs that also feature some really nice under the hood tricks, and they feature some non-standard waveforms for unique asymmetrical modulation styles, as well as the ability to control their phase based on the pan position to get some really interesting stereo effects where when an LFO is rising on the left, it's following on the right, and you get this really nice stereo movement. We also have a dedicated pitch LFO for vibrato duties, and there's some easy, quick assignments so that you can modulate the 2 oscillators, you can modulate the voice detuning, as well as the modulation oscillator, and it's still usable in the mod map to modulate other things and control stuff in different ways. So next, let's look at how easy it is to create a modulation routing. For this, I'm going to be using LFO1 to modulate the filter, and I've started from a pretty neutral patch. And I'm going to go ahead and hit assign in the LFO1 section. And then on screen, we can see that it's now telling me to select what we want to use LFO1 to modulate. And so I'm going to select the filter just by turning the filter knob and setting the depth on the screen. And so you can see I've now created a modulation routing just by hitting one button and turning a knob. and we can hear how it sounds. But it can go much deeper and has a lot of modularity. So another thing that we could do, for example, is use LFO2 to modulate LFO1. So I'm once again just going to hit the assign button in the LFO2 section and then go ahead and turn LFO1's rate knob. And now you're going to hear that LFO1's speed is going to change based on LFO2's rate, and we can hear how that sounds. And this is also a very dramatic effect. So if I want to make it a little bit more subtle, both of the LFOs have an amplitude knob, which allow you to attenuate anything that they're modulating on the panel. So we can just scale that back a little bit and create something that's a little less dramatic. And that's just scratching the surface. If you look at the mod map too, you'll see that our 2 quick assignments are present in the mod map, and we can go in and edit the depths, as well as add different mathematical functions or run them through a VCA that's going to get controlled by something else like the mod wheel or the macro knob. So the modulation capabilities of Muse are incredibly flexible, and almost anything on the panel can be modulated. Beyond that, we have a really powerful arpeggiator that we developed. I'm going to pull up a patch for that. With the arpeggiator, we made an effort to include a lot of interesting points of functionality not commonly found on other arpeggiators, like the ability to program in a rhythm for your arpeggiation, the ability to add randomized rests, to hear loops that you like and lock them so that they repeat, and you even have the option of taking the arpeggiator and recording it into the sequencer if you've developed a pattern that you really like, but you want to be able to add polyphonic passages or just be able to move notes around, change notes, things like that. So it becomes a really powerful sketch pad for developing compositional ideas. And while we are talking about the sequencer, we can take a look at how that works. I'm going to pull up a patch with nice sequence, and let's listen to how it sounds. So the sequencer is one of the more deep and complex sequencers that we've ever created at Moog, and it features a lot of really interesting ways of adding generative movement and improvising on the sequences that you enter. And one of the things that we focused on was creating multiple different ways of entering notes so that if you're not as comfortable on a keyboard, there's different options for ways to engage with the sequencer and develop compositions. And I can show you how easy it is to write a sequence by simply clearing the sequence that we were listening to out. I can record a sequence while it's stopped by simply hitting record and playing in 16 notes. And the sequencer can actually play up to 64 notes, but let's just focus on 16 for now. And now if I hit play, I can also add new notes into that sequence while it's playing just by having it play while record is on and playing notes. So let's add a few different things in. If I don't like what I've added, it's really easy to just undo by holding the init button and hitting record, and you can undo the last thing that you recorded in. And then you can also overdub sequences by hitting shift and record at the same time so that record blinks. And now when we play notes as it's recording, rather than replacing the notes, it's just going to add them up to 8 notes per step. And another thing that we can look at really quickly is how the generative features work. So I've gone into the sequencer settings menu and I've selected a scale and a root note for what I want to have happen on the sequencer. And then if I go into the probability menu, I can turn up note probability for all the steps, let's say to 25%. And then I'll go to my gate probability and turn that down to about 85%. So now we can hear how it sounds using probability to have our sequence improvise on itself a little bit and wander around whatever we've put in. So as you can hear, the sequencer is a really unique and powerful improvisational partner for you to play over or simply use in your productions when working in the studio. And to sum it up, we can point out the fact that we have USB connectivity in the back for hooking it up to your computer, as well as helping deal with library management for all of your patches and sequences. We have MIDI in, out, and through. We have 2 CV outputs and 2 CV inputs for connecting to modular gear, as well as an analog clock out and clock in for clocking from Eurorack or other analog clock-based devices. We have a standard expression and sustain pedal in, and then a stereo output as well as a headphone output on the front. As you can see, the Muse is a really powerful compositional workbench and sounds really, really beautiful. We think that it will inspire you as you're using it in your productions and also offer you all sorts of places to grow with the instrument as you learn it and explore it more. We're confident that the Muse will satisfy both live performers who want to take advantage of some of the expressive features and macro controls that we provide on the panel, but is equally well suited to the studio musicians who want to incorporate it into their production. If you want to learn more about the Moog Muse, go to guitarcenter.com, contact one of their expert gear advisors, or check it out yourself at your local GC.